Okay, so we'll finish up on retailing, and depending on how much volume I've got left, we'll cut into wholesaling a little bit. So, yes, I'm sorry,
When do the position papers due the new one?
next Tuesday.
And then is it the same groups that we did for the first one?
Right. If anybody needs to, just send me an email, I'll shoot you the group back, okay?
Thank you.
By the way, we'll do an evaluation. It's an online group evaluation at the end of the year. So that, and it's anonymous so that everyone can evaluate their group members. So just want to make sure I said that too. Okay. So in the battle between, or the channels, who has the power? Which group are now considered the, and I think it is safe to say that the dominion of the retailers is now the channel captains in the group, and they have the primary power. Before 1978, maybe even further than that, manufacturers had domination when it came to the standard distribution channels. They were the big dogs on the porch. In '96, Parasimon wrote an article in Harvard Business Review that said that the change is forever, and now that the power resides in the retailers. And it was because of one major retailer, and of course that's Walmart. Retailers dominate, all right, for many reasons. One of them is quite simply, we have reached an era of saturation in the number of retailers. And as a matter of fact, in the last 5 years, we've seen a significant 10%, I believe, decrease in the number of retailers, both online and brick and mortar. And so what has happened is those manufacturers of goods have squeezed to a smaller and smaller outlets for them to be able to achieve. For many goods, it's okay. I mean, if I'm selling electronics or for small items, the direct channel is a reasonable way to go. But if I'm selling Dave's bread, I'm not going to be selling that by mail. I'm going to be needing it to locate it in a place where people expect, which would be a supermarket. And so what has happened is, the other part of that also to say is, along with the number of retailers shrinking, remember that the total income that a supermarket has is based upon a very razor-thin margin. So as I said before, supermarkets make anywhere from 2 to 4% of revenue generated off of branded goods that they sell. It means that a $1 can of peas, let's say, from what $1 can of peas, the supermarket would only make 2%. And so with such narrow margins to be able to work with, and remember, demand side strategies and cost side strategies, what you find is that most supermarkets engage in a lot of cost side strategy. And one of them is twisting the arms of the manufacturers and the suppliers, I should say, okay? So, retailers have had little choice but to pressure their suppliers for price concessions. Sorry. And so what you seek is retailers trying to improve their productivity and lower their costs while keeping their prices are the same or even lower. And especially if you're talking about a supermarket. A supermarket has very much 85 to 95% of the same goods as any other store does. And so how are they able to achieve revenue other than enormous sales volumes? And so they'll make $1 million of sale, And in that $1 million, they'll make 20,000. The enormous amount of effort and the enormous amount of labor that has to go in, excuse me, for achieving just that 2% margin. So there are many suppliers and few sellers. This pressure means increased pressures on the buyers. Because there are so many alternatives in the manufacturing world now, and remember, as I said, the total number of retailers has not only reached saturation, but reduced. And so it means that manufacturers have very little places to go. Suppliers figured they had a great idea. They would come up with promotion allowances, ways of paying off the supermarkets so that they could find shelf space. And in essence, what they did was they made a Faustian bargain, because what happened is that as soon as the supermarkets found that they would give them more money just for doing certain things, that became a standard and the expectation. This is the problem with reward power, is that reward power has the difficulty of breeding the desire for more rewards. And so manufacturers offered deals to retailers, and quickly those deals became the expectations that the retailers flipped on the manufacturers. And so let's start talking about them one at a time. First is forward buying. So I need to be able to sell this quarter's total allotment of peas. Let's just say that. So Del Monte goes to Kroger's and says, we will give you an even more substantial discount if, instead of buying the average 200,000 we sell or you use in a month, that you do an entire year of let's say 2 million, and we'll give you a substantial discount from that. It increases the quantity sold, but it plays heck with forecasting and everything else and marketing plans, because in essence, what you've done is you've pre-sold whatever your future sales are. This is the inherent danger, by the way, of getting revenue for the next day's efforts and applying it to this day's work. And so what they do, the problem is, of course, is that if I forward buy 2 million peas, where am I going to put them? So what you do find is the answer is the continuous replenishment program. And so the way that works, Walmart is the one who came up with this idea, was basically they would say to Del Monte, we will buy 2 million cans in this year. We will contract you for doing them, but I only want you to give 100,000 cans at a time. And so those 100,000 cans go to Walmart. Once it meets a certain minimum number, then automatically they're replenished without having to go through new contracts or new negotiations. And so that kind of fixes the problem. Now, not a hard problem, but one of those that needs to be recognized is the concept of diverting. And so what will happen is that large quantities in a promotion and distribute them to other locations where the discount isn't available. Or an example is where taxes are too high. And so instead of buying the goods within a certain location where the taxes may be 13 to 18%, they're bought in another state where there is no tax, and those goods are shipped across the United States to another location. So there's 8 states in the United States that does not have a sales tax. Florida, Tennessee, and I forget all the others. But they could buy those goods, save on the tax, and ultimately ship them across the United States and ultimately save themselves money. And it's not a It's not bad. I mean, no, but it's difficult to plan for those things. And, you know, it's just the nature of the beast. There's the expectation, some difficulties that are wrapped around it. So, slotting allowances. So, let's see something. So this is an average retail outlet. Think of that as the front door. This is the general traffic area that goes in and around the store. Let's say the deli is over there and, you know, new things are over here. Let's say, you know, fresh produce is over here. And you have a standard row across rows that you would have in a normal supermarket. The highest traffic areas in a normal supermarket are these. You know, you may not go up and down every aisle, but there's a likely possibility that to get to any of these aisles, you have to pass here. What retailers had decided was, or excuse me, manufacturers had decided, especially if they have new products, they want to be on these end caps. They're also called islands, all right? So if I'm at this end cap, I have the maximum traffic in the store. People are going to come back and forth. And so I want that. And so originally what you had was manufacturers saying, I'll pay you extra to be there. To the point of the expectation, reward power says, well, you're not going to get there. Nobody's going to get there unless they pay you more. This is what a slotting allowance is. Slotting allowance says is that as a manufacturer, I have the expectation of being at a certain place, at a certain location, or I'm going to be anywhere from 5'5" to 6'5" along any given aisle, which is generally considered eye level. If you notice the products generally that are at that eye level there, they're generally going to be the most highest traffic, they'll be the most expensive. And depending on which aisles you are, especially two areas that generate a lot of revenue in a supermarket are soft drinks and cereal. Have you ever seen what they're paying for cereal nowadays? Okay. If you look in that area between 5 and 6'5", you're going to find the highest revenue generating cereal right there. Also, soft drinks generate a lot of revenue too. You know, the interesting thing is they will give away a soft drink with every meal because there's no way they can't make money by giving you a soft drink, if that makes any sense. Okay. I mean, even if it's 1 or 2 cents, the actual production price of soft drinks is infinitesimally small. These are basically water with other chemicals that are, you know, mixed into it. What's always interesting to me is water will cost more than the soft drink. It's just the way it is. Okay, slotting allowances. So slotting allowance is a compensation for the cost of putting a new product on the shelf in a particular space. Because of its high premium price, if I'm coming out with a new product, it's very difficult to get on those end caps because it takes a lot of money. What you'll generally find is that there's some deals that are being made to be able to get in that particular place. And generally, companies that are launching new products tend not to be new companies. They tend to be long, substantial, you know, companies that are launching new lines. Generally, if you look at the end caps and see what's on there, usually you're looking at seasonal goods, new products, or something that is there to appeal the individuals to come to that aisle, but they're paying for it to get to that area, okay? So failure fees started in 1989. I think it was Kroger's that started them. And there's a certain amount of moral ambiguity that comes with failure fees, but it comes down to this. I'm a new company and I have a new product. I've got to find a way to get on the shelf, especially where shelf space becomes more and more limited. So what I do is I go to the supermarket and I make a deal. I say, I guarantee a certain revenue from this particular shelf or selling a particular number of units. And if I fail to within a given time, usually a quarter, that's why they say 3 months, then the supermarket can charge a failure fee, a failure to be able to meet those quotas. Because of their nature, failure fees are not paid up front. It allows small manufacturers to be able to get in and with product placement. This is how Zapp's potato chips in Louisiana, by the way, got its big kick in. Zapp's potato chips are kettle chips. They're really, really spicy, very crisp. They were part of a new wave of kettle chips that kind of launched. They were a small corporation. They bet big and they won big. The problem with this is it creates a moral hazard because the retailer may not support it as well as they should. If I'm coming down to a quarter and my end of a quarter profit is supposed to be a certain level, and I'm not going to make it by $10,000, whatever, possible that me as a store will not support that product enough so that it will deliberately fail. You're banking on failure, and that's not a morally clear kind of position to be. But do they exist? Absolutely. It's when you're rolling the dice and you're playing for the big game. That's when you do the failure piece. And the last, not the last, but the second is private branding. So this is another way that supermarkets try to make money, and that is to have their own labels. Usually they are money saving, but unexciting alternatives to national brands. We generally are talking about goods that can be packaged and shipped and have a relatively decent shelf life. We're talking about Del Monte canned peas, Van Camp's. We're talking about generally items like sandwich bags and laundry detergents sometimes as well. These tend to be items that freshness is not a number one ideal. Now, there are those that are true vertical markets that do have those things all the way up until, cut meat. And I would say Aldi is the best example I can think of that goes totally to a private branding. In my respects, Aldi sells about 85 or 90% of the things they sell are their own private brands. And they do it well. Why? Well, a can of Del Monte peas that Walmart would sell would net them 2%. And so out of 50-cent can of peas, they'd make a penny. If they sold Sam's Club peas, they would make 17 cents versus a penny. So the margins generally on private brands are anywhere from 30 to 35%. That's a substantial margin. It's enough for them to easily support that. And what you will find that's interesting is if you look at that Sam's Club can of peas, it will say something to the effect of packaged by Del Monte. So in essence, it's the same thing, but in a different can. And so if they offer a clear substitute where the goods are relatively same, remember, consumer perceptions. If I cannot tell the difference between two goods, the number one way I'm going to choose is by price. And so this is where private labels kind of cook up, okay? And so the last is, it talks about trends is globalization in retailing, and globalization will continue as a trend. However, globalization, even it has its limits. One of them, quite simply, is especially in developed nations, there's a genuine lack of real estate in which to build new stores. Not only that, but remember, as I said, channels is the most expensive of all of the 4 Ps, and that to build a new channel system requires an enormity of money, along with the factors that they've already got enormous channels out there for who is ever domestic in those particular markets. Walmart has about 5,200 stores in the United States. They have about 10,000 worldwide. So it's like 5,000 stores. They've done very good in South America, a little good in Africa, but they've changed their stores to Asia to fit Asian tastes, which are important to make sure that they are culturally sensitive. And then in Europe, they've just bombed completely. Just quite simple as Europe will not support Walmart. That's the way it goes. And a lot of that has to do with those dealership relationships in new markets. And the fact is that their products do not meet whatever the basis is for those particular cultures. And so what you try to do, Walmart has tried to do, is lean in on the things that they do best, which is shipping, and hopefully make their brand appeal to others. It's lagged behind, but globalization in retailing is always expanding because you benefit from the economies of scale. It's as simple as that, okay? The big get bigger. And this is why you see, like on the top brands that I showed you in retail, I showed you 3 or 4 of those, and those are generally retailers like supermarkets and their expansion into other nations. And I also showed you 3 of those that were European that are expanding to the United States, because United States is still the biggest economy in the world. $30 trillion go through the United States economy, and it is constantly and still expanding even now, even though retailers in essence have reached their saturation point. So how can an Aldi come into the United States and do so well? They create a unique brand appeal. They create value in the things that they do, and consumers desire them and buy them. It's a success story. Okay, so that's it with retailing. And so we finished on that. Make sure you remember when we talk about cost side strategies and demand side strategies, and remember the difficulties between retailers and manufacturers, and that retailers basically dominate over manufacturers now. Okay. So where am I? Right there. And so now we're going to talk about wholesale. So if any of you have the possibility of being interviewed by a wholesaler, I would 100% be for it. Wholesaling is a great industry. It is expanding, not necessarily for the number of people who work, but quite simply because wholesaling is such a major industry that supports so many others. So what is the definition of what a wholesaler is? So I'm going to use the words wholesalers and distributors in the same vein, all right? If I use those words, they mean the same thing, test purposes or otherwise as well, okay? So wholesalers and distributors are independently owned and operated firms that buy and sell their products of which they claim ownership. And that is a very important last phrase. Why is it important? Because they take title and possession of the goods, They have the ability to set prices independent of the manufacturers. And that is a key component. The manufacturers have some influence over them in order to be able to get the contracts, but generally playing on the level of wholesalers is a different world than retailers. And generally manufacturers do not have the control of a wholesaler that they do a retailer. Wholesaling is unique versus retailing is that while retailing tends to be global, wholesaling tends to be local. Industry to industry, they tend to be geographically fixed in locations. So how big is the wholesale industry? Annually in the United States, it's $8.2 trillion. So it's almost 20 to 25% of our GDP is in wholesale. And yet what they do is, it seems like all they do is sell products, but the truth is they sell service. As a matter of fact, this is probably a test question. Wholesaling is the epitome of the service industry. Because wholesalers do not represent manufacturers, they represent industries. Wholesalers take physical inputs and products from other businesses that are closely associated with each other and bundle them by adding services to those particular goods. They can do what manufacturers can't, and as a matter of fact, in many ways, mimic franchising and specialize to the groups that they sell to. So a wholesaler does not sell for personal consumption. They sell to retailers or to other downstream intermediaries, and they right-size their goods for specialties. So the last 50 to 60 years has seen a wave of consolidation. Nearly 2/3 of all wholesalers have disappeared. But the number of people who work for wholesalers has maintained itself. So the consolidation has not been about a shrinking industry, far from it. It's actually a growing industry that the advantages have been sparked by IT. IT has brought about the economies of scale, much greater efficiencies, and much lower costs. And that's why the consolidation has occurred, not because the industries are going down, but because it's just more efficient to do so. And that's also one of the appeals of wholesale, okay? So there are not only distributors, but there are also what are known as master distributors. These are distributors that are so big and so large that they distribute to others. Master distributors take over not just a given geographic location, but maybe even an entire territory or even an entire industry. They are giants, not because they have pushed anyone else out of business, but they create stable and prosperous systems that suits everybody, and everybody is happy with the biggest dog on the porch. The manufacturers are happy, the distributors below them are happy, and the retailers are as well, because things in a very efficient manner packaged for a given industry. So I'll give you an example. Let's see, sorry. So, try this again. Got that right? Oh, wait, here it is. Okay. So, there it is. Here we go. So when I was just a wee pup of 19 or 20, I worked in the oil field industry, and then I worked there another 2 years after I got out of college. I worked for a company right around here in Morgan City called Port Hardware. Port Hardware was a hardware store in a small town, and that small town had exploded due to the boom of the oil field in the 70s and 80s. There were 3 hardware stores in Morgan City. There was Port Hardware, Morgan City Hardware, and I can't remember the third for my life. I can't, anyway. So when you started to see the development in the Gulf, what you started to see also is requisitions and requirements from goods as quickly or as close as they possibly could. And shipping from other central locations was inefficient and just was not acceptable. So what you found is that large people like Kerr-McGee and Conoco would come to us with outrageous orders that we could not say no to. So an example is working in the Gulf. One of the things that's important is stainless steel tubing and fittings. Stainless steel is vital because, of course, the salt in the Gulf eats away at everything else, steel, iron, you name it. And stainless steel is the only thing that doesn't corrode over time. Stainless steel is expensive. A little 1/4-inch fitting costs about $50. A foot of 1/4-inch stainless steel tubing costs anywhere from $18 to $25 per foot. One day, Kerr-McGee lands us with a requisition for 100,000 feet of stainless steel tubing. Now, how can a little hardware store like ours possibly, 1, fill that order, and 2, turn away from it? You're talking about $1 million. How can we possibly let that go? Well, turns out we had a group with big shoulders who was in Houma by the name of Moody Price. And so Moody Price is the epitome of a wholesaler, master distributor, and the epitome of service. So if you look at these across the bottom, these are given manufacturers that make tubing, that make fittings, that make all sorts of manufacturers' equipment for generic purposes. None of this stuff is packaged for the oil field, and yet, given specialty ideas, it could be if it's used right. And so what they did was they would consolidate all types of manufacturers who would come in, Parker Fittings, Parker 1/4-inch stainless steel tubing, 1/4-inch fittings, even 1/2-inch fittings if you would. They make them not for the oil field, they just make them for all the industries out there. But what Moody Price does is they take those goods, they specialize on them, understand their purposes in the oil field, repackage them, learn on them, train them, and teach us as retailers what are the best practices in using those particular fittings. Not only that, but Moody Price has big shoulders. We can go to there, consolidate all of our orders together. This is right out of chapter 1. Consolidate all of our orders together, reduce the ambiguity, talk directly to the manufacturers, and bring and force our requests and needs to the extent that those requirements are consolidated and they pay attention to. So we were able to buy that. We made a lot of money. Moody Price was able to store what we didn't need so that we could ship it when we needed to, because they did a continuous replenishment at the time. It was a win-win situation. Now, Moody Price took some of our sales. They're bigger than us, but they also gave some of those sales that were right-sized for us. That's business, okay? Can't do anything about that. Now, I also talked about they did more than that, that they had an epitome of service. And this is the other things that they did. They did more than just simply sell goods. They did services as well. So we used to do high pressure hoses we did maximum 3,000 PSI. They make ones up to 40,000 PSI and can test them as well. So that's one of the things that they do. Not only that, but they run safety schools so that if our people have minimum requirements in terms of well, yeah, actually, if you work in the oil field, you have to go to a safety school first. So they run the safety schools themselves. So rental is interesting. Howard Hughes in 1902, 1903, his family was the first group that instead of selling the goods, the Hughes tools, they rented them. So it meant that an organization, instead of having to buy $10,000 to $12,000 for a sledge lock coupling, that they could rent it for a week and then give it back. And so that's very successful. Well, they do those things. They rent all of those particular pieces of equipment, tube benders, tools, threading machines, all of those things. They rent them instead of us having to try to buy them. Once again, enormous advantages. And this is what I mean by wholesalers are the epitome of service. They don't need, none of these are the goods they sell as much as the services they provide. I was reading NVIDIA is going to rent chips. Like for AI technology, you can actually go right now if you wanted to. You could rent an AI engine for 39 cents a minute. I was looking that up. Larry Ellison of, I forgot what's his corporation. Anyway, they're starting to do that. And that is a classic example and pretty much in the same line here. Okay, so this is the wholesaler. This is the essence of what they do. This is how they go about providing value. So, as I said, they consolidate orders. They help their customers avoid minimum order requirements. They mirror those things as a franchisor, and they can customize equipment just for us. They give us the economies of scale, help them resolve logistic problems and support issues. Once again, their feet are on the ground. And that's what wholesalers do that manufacturers can't, is they right size their needs for the industry that they work in. So there are other supply chain participants. As I've said before, the more complex, the more number of people that are in the system, the more efficient the system is. When you start to see specialists in the environment, what you know is that you're working with an increasingly efficient system, because it means that those specialized intermediaries can focus on that one particular desired service and do it best and do it with the best economies of scale. So what that means is that the focus of many of those things can be given over to other specialists who do the job as well or even better. Instead of Moody Price employing a sales force, they can rent or put into contract what are known as manufacturer's agents. So if you're into personal selling and you want to be a salesperson, your ultimate goal is to be a manufacturer's agent. A manufacturer's agent is an independent organization. It may be one person, it may be a group of people. They specialize in a given field, once again. They take no salary whatsoever. They make a commission on every item that they sell. And so they may represent multiple manufacturers. They may represent Parker. They can represent competitors. We had one individual. So one of the things that you spend a lot of money on in the oil field, believe it or not, is filters, because they have enormous diesel engines that run a lot of the generators. And the generators are set for a certain number of thousands of hours before you have to change the filters. And the filters, you go through them like water. So there's an individual who used to come to our group, and he specialized just in filters. And he had a new car every year and he was doing pretty good. Commissioned salespeople, by the way, commissioned agents are the highest paid salespeople in the world, just to let you know. They do not take title. They do not take property. They're there just to sell. They may represent more than one manufacturer and they sell to more than one wholesaler, but they perform a critical function that is needed. And finally, we'll do this before we go. Third-party logistics providers. Third-party logistics providers charge customers for a given activity for a service that they render. They will do one particular thing, they'll do it very well, and it will be a specialized intermediary that makes its money based upon providing a given service. So let's go back. Let's see, is this the one? Let's see. Okay. So I said that they rented tools. They also rent platforms. In other words, platforms to drill and platforms to produce petroleum. So Conoco, Chevron, Exxon, all those corporations do not own any drilling platforms or production platforms themselves. They rent them. And depending on what they rent, depends on how much they're charged. A drilling platform, especially if it's a stationary one with legs, is about $250,000 a day. A drilling ship, which has to go 2,000 feet and go maybe 300 miles out into the Gulf, that's generally ranked at like $2.5 to $3 million a day. So just to give you an idea of the enormous prices just wrapped up in just the rental, that doesn't include the cost of running the platforms or the salaries that are connected with all of those things. Now, just think if you break a hose and that hose stops the entire production platform. And a drilling platform, by the way, has not found oil yet. So a drilling platform is wasting money. It's burning cash every second that it's out there. How long can you wait for one hose to be delivered so that you can start running again? And this is the essence of what hotshot trucking is. So a hotshot is a corporation or a trucking company that has is on call 24 hours a day. They guarantee to pick up usually by the second ring, and they are there for the purpose of delivering a good to a particular place at a particular time. And so they would get, I've gotten these calls before. Get a 2 a.m. phone call. You need to get a hose to the Fushan dock by 4 a.m. That kind of thing. It's got to be there. And so this is an example, hotshot trucking, of when money is no object. Okay. It means nothing. Speed is of the essence. And this is a very narrow third-party logistics provider that provides transportation at the absolute minimum time frame. I've gotten a couple of tickets by doing the hotshot work. They paid for them. They didn't care. They just needed to get the goods there at that time. And so this is an example of a very unique third-party logistics provider that provides an invaluable service that you couldn't live without. Generally, they're small 3/4-ton trucks. They're not hauling anything big. Certainly not an 18-wheeler, but once again, time is of the essence, okay? All right, so that's all my voice has room for today. We are finished. We will come back and finish wholesaling, and I hope you all have a good afternoon. Thank you.
Thank you.